Listen every once in a while. Life forces you to stop, look in the mirror, and confront the truth you've been avoiding. Nobody is coming to save you. Nobody is going to suddenly show up and build your life for you. And the moment you finally understand that, really understand it, you unlock a level of power most people never reach. Because the moment you stop, you start building. The moment you stop explaining, you start improving. And the moment you stop focusing on them, you start winning for you. Most people spend their entire lives obsessed with everything except the one thing that actually moves their life forward themselves. They're distracted by noise, drama, opinions, jealousy, trends, competition, validation. They're busy watching how everyone else is living instead of building a life worth watching. But winners, they pull their attention back, they reclaim their energy, they invest their time into the only place it multiplies: their skills, their habits, their discipline, their character. When you stop waiting for someone to rescue you, life takes on a completely different shape because suddenly the responsibility isn't shared, diluted, or placed on anything outside of you. It becomes yours fully and completely, and that is where real power begins. Most people spend their entire life hoping for a moment, a person, a sign, or a shortcut that makes everything easier. But the truth is that ease doesn't build you. Responsibility does. When you take ownership of everything in your life, the wins, the losses, the habits, the outcomes, you stop living in reaction and start living in creation. And that shift alone separates you from everyone who is still waiting for the world to change instead of changing themselves. The moment you decide that your progress depends on you and only you, everything you do begins to align. You stop wasting time searching for external validation because you realize it never created growth in the first place. You stop looking for permission to start because you finally understand that nobody is going to hand you the life you want. You start making decisions based on where you want to go rather than where you currently are. And even though that path feels heavier, it is that weight that shapes you into someone capable of carrying more, doing more, and becoming more. When you embrace full responsibility, excuses start dissolving one by one. The stories you used to tell yourself about not having enough time, not having enough support, not having the right conditions lose their power the second you admit that your outcomes reflect your choices. This isn't about blame, it's about leverage. Because when you blame nothing else, you gain the ability to change everything. That's when growth accelerates. That's when discipline stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like freedom. When everything becomes your responsibility, everything becomes your opportunity. People who rely on others to push them will always collapse the moment that push disappears, but people who rely on themselves become unshakable. They build routines that don't depend on mood, commitment that doesn't depend on motivation, and standards that don't depend on circumstances. They become the type of person who shows up because showing up is who they are, not something they do only when life feels easy. Responsibility builds identity, and identity sustains results long after motivation fades. Most people underestimate how much control they actually have over their life because they've spent years outsourcing their effort to things outside their reach. They wait for inspiration, direction, or validation instead of realizing that the most powerful changes happen in the moments nobody sees. When you hold yourself accountable, you stop chasing temporary relief and start building permanent transformation. You become aware of how every small action compounds and how every decision either reinforces who you are or who you're trying to become. Accepting responsibility doesn't mean life gets simpler. It means you get stronger. You begin leaning into discomfort because you know comfort never created progress. You take control of your time with sharper boundaries. You stop negotiating with your weakness. You start choosing discipline, not because it feels good, but because it feels right. And slowly, without realizing it, your life begins to reflect the work you've been avoiding for years. There is a version of you that exists on the other side of complete self-responsibility, a version with greater clarity, greater resilience, and greater consistency. The person you become when you stop handing your power away is someone who learns faster, adapts faster, and grows faster because nothing is filtered through excuses. The moment you accept that every result begins with you and ends with you, you start developing a level of internal control that makes external circumstances irrelevant. Everything changes when you stop hoping for an easier path and start preparing yourself for a stronger journey. The breakthroughs appear the moment you realize that your next level isn't found in waiting, wishing, or watching others. It's found in the work you commit to daily when nobody is checking in. The life you want begins the second you take full ownership of your actions, your discipline, and your future. And that ownership becomes the foundation you build everything else on. When you start pulling your attention inward, everything around you begins to make more sense because you're no longer scattered by the noise, opinions, and expectations of the world. Most people live their entire lives outward focused, constantly comparing, constantly reacting, constantly seeking approval from people who aren't even paying attention to them. The moment you redirect that energy back into yourself, you realize how much of your potential was being drained by things that never deserved your focus in the first place. Turning inward isn't about being selfish. It's about finally reclaiming the power you've been giving away for years without even noticing. Every real improvement begins the second you stop trying to fix the world and start improving the person who has to walk through it. People usually search for better circumstances, better opportunities, better luck, never realizing that those things only matter when the person facing them is capable. When you develop yourself, you don't need perfect conditions because you become adaptable. You don't need someone to push you because you become self-driven. You don't need validation because your progress becomes your proof. Improvement always starts inside, long before it shows outside. Self-focus is what allows you to identify the parts of your life that need upgrading, not avoiding. It forces you to confront your patterns, your habits, your weaknesses, and your excuses with honesty instead of denial. Most people run from that mirror because it's uncomfortable, but discomfort is where growth hides. When you focus on you, you stop pretending that small problems don't matter. You start addressing the details, fixing the gaps, and tightening the areas of your life that you've been neglecting. That's where momentum begins, through disciplined self-awareness. Self-discipline becomes the engine that drives all your future success. Without it, motivation fades, consistency collapses, and progress becomes random. But when you build discipline, you gain control over your time, your energy, and your actions. You start doing the work even when you don't feel like it. You keep promises to yourself even when nobody knows about them. You develop a standard that refuses to drop no matter the situation. Discipline makes your results predictable, not accidental. And that's what separates people who grow from people who hope. Self-investment is the foundation of long-term winning because you elevate the one asset that determines every outcome in your life, you. When you invest your time into learning, your skills multiply. When you invest your energy into your health, your capacity expands. When you invest your focus into your goals, your direction sharpens. And every small investment compounds quietly until one day the gap between you and who you used to be becomes unrecognizable. The world rewards people who invest in themselves far more than those who wait for someone else to do it. Most people spend more effort trying to appear successful than actually becoming successful. They chase attention instead of ability. They chase validation instead of competence. They chase shortcuts instead of mastery. But when you focus inward, you understand that real growth doesn't happen in public. It happens in the hours you're alone, practicing, refining, learning, and improving without applause. That's where self-focus becomes a weapon because it directs your energy toward creation, not comparison. The moment you commit to working on yourself, you start noticing how much stronger and more capable you become. Challenges that once overwhelmed you begin to feel manageable. Situations that used to distract you lose their power. Opinions that once affected you no longer matter. You begin to operate from a place of clarity rather than confusion, discipline rather than emotion, direction rather than chaos. Self-focus forms the identity of someone who doesn't need to be convinced to grow. They're driven by who they're becoming. When you make self-focus, self-discipline, and self-investment your default, your life begins to shift in ways you never expected. You stop competing with others because you're too busy competing with your previous self. You stop chasing external noise because your internal standards become louder. You stop being reactive because you're operating from intention, not impulse. And as you continue to refine yourself, you realize that every improvement you make internally becomes the fuel that drives every result you achieve. Externally, your results are shaped long before anyone ever sees them because the work that matters most is the work done when the world isn't watching. It's easy to talk about goals, dreams, and intentions, but none of those things create outcomes. What creates outcomes is the repetition of actions done consistently, quietly, and relentlessly in the background. Public declarations feel good, but private habits build the person capable of delivering on those declarations. When you understand that gap, you stop trying to look committed and start actually becoming committed. Most people underestimate how much of their life is controlled by the behaviors they repeat without thinking. Every morning choice, every skipped task, every delay, every moment of discipline or distraction builds a pattern, and those patterns eventually determine whether you move forward or stay stuck. Intentions might make you feel ambitious, but habits determine whether that ambition becomes real. When your habits are aligned with your goals, progress becomes inevitable. When no amount of motivation can compensate. Consistency is the quiet force that outperforms talent, emotion, and luck. Motivation is temporary, rises and falls depending on how you feel, what's happening around you, and how convenient the moment is. Consistency doesn't care about convenience. It shows up whether the day is good or bad, whether you're tired or energized, whether you feel inspired or completely numb. It doesn't ask for permission. It demands execution. And the people who win are the ones who've learned to act without negotiating with their emotions. The real growth happens in repetition, not in rare intensity. Anyone can work hard for a day. Anyone can push themselves when excitement is high. But what builds mastery is showing up on the days when your mind tries to bargain, when the excuses feel louder than your discipline, when quitting feels easier than continuing. Those moments are where self-trust is built. You prove to yourself that your actions are stronger than your feelings, and that identity shift makes you more powerful than any external motivation ever could. Private habits are also where you confront your truth because nobody is there to applaud you, judge you, or hold you accountable except yourself. The silence exposes whether you're actually doing the work or just pretending you are. That's why consistency shapes character. It forces you to rise to your own standards instead of hiding behind excuses, circumstances, or opinions. When you do the work alone, you know exactly why you're winning or why you're not. And that clarity gives you complete control over your life. Your habits create momentum, and momentum creates results. Small actions done consistently build a rhythm that multiplies over time, turning minor daily improvements into major long-term transformation. The people who seem unstoppable aren't doing huge things. They're doing simple things without fail. They train, they study, they execute, they refine, and they repeat. While others wait for perfect timing, they create progress through consistency so strong it becomes part of who they are. Every result you want, more money, more fitness, more growth, more confidence, more opportunities, comes from habits that compound quietly. You don't see the change immediately, but every day you show up, you're either reinforcing the identity of someone who grows or someone who gives up. The gap between those two identities widens with every decision you make in private, and sooner or later, the difference becomes visible to the world, not because you talked about it, but because your actions made it undeniable. When you rely on consistency instead of motivation, you no longer depend on circumstances to determine your progress. You build a structure, a system, and a standard that keeps you moving regardless of how you feel. This is how people separate themselves, by choosing discipline over emotion, repetition over excitement, and private habits over public promises. And the greater that separation becomes, the clearer it becomes why some people rise while others stay exactly where they are. Removing the noise from your life begins with recognizing just how much of your attention is being stolen without your permission. Most people wake up and immediately hand their focus to notifications, opinions, endless scrolling, and meaningless distractions. They don't even realize how much mental bandwidth they're giving away to things that have nothing to do with their goals. When you cut that noise out, you suddenly see how much clarity you've been missing. You become aware of how much time you've been wasting. You start realizing that your mind was never the problem, your environment was. And once you quiet the world around you, the voice inside you becomes impossible to ignore. Excuses are the silent killers of progress, but they convince you that your limitations are fixed, your circumstances are permanent, and your difficulties are unique. But excuses aren't reflections of reality. They're reflections of comfort. The moment you remove excuses, you expose your real potential. You force yourself to stop relying on stories that protect you from discomfort and start relying on effort that builds you through discomfort. Every excuse you eliminate unlocks a new level of capability, not because life gets easier, but because you stop negotiating with your weaknesses and start operating from your strengths. Distractions drain more energy than hard work ever will. They create mental clutter, emotional fatigue, and endless loops of half-finished tasks. The danger isn't that distractions waste minutes. The danger is that they destroy momentum. And without momentum, even the smallest goal feels impossible. When you remove distractions, you create mental space for focus to thrive. You gain back hours of productive time without doing anything extraordinary. You build the ability to dive deeper, stay present longer, and move faster because your attention is no longer fractured. Focus becomes your superpower in a world where everyone is overwhelmed by options and overstimulated by noise. People are trying to achieve big results with scattered attention, and then they wonder why nothing changes. Focus is rare, and rare things are valuable. When you protect your focus, you create an unfair advantage because you can make more progress in a few hours of deep work than most people make in a week of distracted effort. Focus multiplies your output, sharpens your skills, and accelerates your growth in a way nothing else can. There's a level of clarity that only appears when you commit fully to a single direction. Most people never experience it because they're constantly jumping between goals, tasks, and impulses. They move in circles instead of forward. But when you focus intensely on one goal, one skill, one mission, you create a level of forward momentum that becomes self-sustaining. You stop dabbling and start mastering. You stop trying and start building. You stop being busy and start being effective. Focus creates a straight line between where you are and where you want to be. Once you remove noise, excuses, and distractions, your environment becomes aligned with your ambitions instead of opposing them. You start eliminating people who drain your energy, habits that sabotage your progress, and routines that slow you down. Your circle gets smaller but stronger. Your days get quieter but more productive. Your priorities get sharper but more meaningful. This alignment gives you a sense of control that most people only dream about because everything around you begins to support the person you're becoming. As your focus strengthens, your standards rise. You stop tolerating inconsistency, half effort, and wasted time because you know what those things cost you. You become more intentional with your decisions because you understand that every choice either sharpens your focus or dulls it. You begin valuing discipline over entertainment, long-term growth over short-term pleasure, and clarity over comfort. This shift doesn't just improve your results, it transforms your identity into someone who demands excellence from themselves in every area. The more you protect your focus, the more you realize how powerful undivided attention truly is. You start completing tasks faster, learning quicker, and executing with far more precision than ever before. You stop relying on motivation because your environment and standards carry you forward. With every distraction removed and every excuse eliminated, you begin operating from a level of efficiency and intensity that separates you from everyone who still lets the world dictate their direction. Success grows in the quiet places of your life, in the moments when nobody is watching and nobody is applauding. It happens in early mornings when the world is still asleep, when you drag yourself forward not because someone told you to, but because you refuse to live below your potential. These silent hours shape you more than any loud victory ever will. The world only sees the outcome, but the transformation happens in the hidden work, the private battles, and the internal decisions you make over and over again when no one else is around to witness them. Discipline becomes the backbone of this silent journey because it forces you to act without needing recognition, praise, or external pressure. It teaches you to follow through on commitments whether you feel ready or not, whether you're tired or energized, whether life is cooperating or throwing obstacles in your path. Discipline strips away excuses and replaces them with standards. It replaces mood with consistency, doubt with structure, and procrastination with execution. And while nobody may applaud you for these invisible victories, they compound into results that eventually speak louder than any words ever could. The sacrifices you make behind the scenes are what separate you from people who only dream. You give up comfort for growth, entertainment for improvement, and temporary pleasure for long-term fulfillment. These choices rarely feel exciting. In fact, most of them feel lonely, uncomfortable, and unappreciated. But greatness has always been born in environments where comfort is scarce and effort is abundant. Sacrifice isn't about losing something. It's about trading something small for something greater, something temporary for something permanent, something convenient for something meaningful. Nobody will ever fully understand what you give up to rise. They won't know how many nights you stayed up working, how many mornings you forced yourself out of bed when everything and you wanted to quit, or how many times you pushed through frustration that almost broke you. People only see the success, never the suffering that built it. And that's why silence is so powerful. It forces you to grow without relying on acknowledgement. You become the kind of person who doesn't need approval because your discipline becomes your validation. The quiet grind builds mental strength because you learn to rely on yourself instead of waiting for someone to push you. You start building trust with your own actions. You know you'll show up because you've proven it in private. This kind of self-trust is rare, and it creates a level of confidence that can't be faked. You don't need to convince anyone of your capabilities because your habits make the statement for you. Silent work creates loud confidence, the kind that comes from knowing exactly how much effort you've invested when nobody was watching. In silence, you develop mastery. Repetition becomes your teacher, patience becomes your partner, and consistency becomes your identity. You stop chasing shortcuts and instead start embracing depth. You practice more, refine more, adjust more, and learn more than most people ever will because you're not performing, you're improving. Improvement is always a silent process. It's slow at first, almost invisible, but over time becomes undeniable. Those hours of unseen effort carve out a version of you that your past self wouldn't recognize. As you continue working in silence, your results begin to compound. Each unnoticed effort builds on the one before it. Skill sharpens, mindset strengthens, discipline deepens. Bit by bit, you become someone capable of things you once thought were impossible. While others are still seeking attention, you're stacking gains. While they wait for motivation, you've already built momentum. And that momentum becomes the force that propels you into opportunities others only talk about. Eventually, the world will notice. They'll see the transformation, the success, the capability, and the confidence. But they'll never see the quiet grind that built it. They won't understand how much discipline it required or how many sacrifices shaped the journey. They'll assume it happened fast because they never witnessed the years of slow, consistent, silent effort. And that's exactly why success is built in silence. Because the silence is where you develop the strength that the world later calls talent. The moment you choose yourself, everything in your life begins to shift because you stop outsourcing your potential to circumstances, to people, or to timing. You stop waiting for someone to validate your goals or remind you of your worth. You take ownership of the direction you're moving in. And that decision alone pushes you into a different mindset. One, where excuses lose their value and execution becomes your language. Choosing yourself means committing to the hard truth that nobody will care about your dreams as much as you do, and nobody should. It's your responsibility to honor them, protect them, and build them regardless of who believes in you. Commitment becomes the fuel that carries you through the days when you don't feel inspired or energetic. Most people commit only when it's convenient, but real commitment happens when you're exhausted, overwhelmed, or uncertain and still move anyway. It means doing the work even when it's not glamorous, even when nobody sees it, and even when progress feels slow. When you commit fully, you remove the option of quitting. You don't wonder if you'll succeed, you simply decide that you will, and every action you take is aligned with that decision. Execution turns your intentions into reality. It's the bridge between who you are and who you want to be, and it demands consistency, not perfection. Daily execution trains your mind to prioritize action over emotion. You stop relying on inspiration to push you forward and start relying on discipline to carry you through. Each day becomes an opportunity to reinforce your identity as someone who follows through, someone who finishes, someone who doesn't negotiate with their potential. Execution is how you separate desire from achievement. When you show up every day, you begin stacking wins that the world won't notice at first. These small wins accumulate quietly, building momentum that makes progress feel more natural and less forced. You start trusting yourself more deeply because your actions prove that you can rely on your own effort. This self-trust becomes a kind of power, an internal certainty that grows stronger with every day you execute regardless of how you feel. Over time, you become someone who doesn't just set goals but expects to reach them. Choosing yourself creates a shift in your standards. You stop accepting half effort from yourself. You stop tolerating the habits that hold you back. You start raising the bar on how you think, how you work, and how you show up. You no longer let laziness or doubt dictate your days. You start operating at a level that reflects the life you want, not the life you're trying to leave behind. And that shift in standards becomes the foundation of your transformation. As you commit fully, your capacity grows. Things that once felt overwhelming start feeling manageable because you've built the mental and emotional strength to handle more. You learn how to push through resistance, how to stay disciplined under pressure, and how to maintain focus when distractions try to pull you off track. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to prove to yourself that you can keep going. With each test you overcome, your confidence deepens. Daily execution turns success into a habit rather than a hope. You start experiencing the compounding effect of consistent effort. You move faster, think sharper, and execute with more precision because repetition has trained you to operate efficiently. You stop wasting time wondering how things will happen and start making them happen through relentless action. The more days you stack, the more unstoppable you become, not because you're perfect, but because you're consistent. And eventually winning becomes your default, not because life magically becomes easier, but because you've built the identity, discipline, and work ethic of someone who wins. You no longer hope for success, you create it. You no longer chase motivation, you create momentum. You no longer question whether you're capable. You prove it to yourself every day through your actions. When you choose yourself, commit fully, and execute daily, the life you once dreamed of becomes the life you see unfolding in front of you. When you walk out of here today, remember one thing: nothing in your life changes until you decide that you are worth changing for. Not your friends, not your family, not the people watching you. The world rewards the ones who show up for themselves even when it's uncomfortable, Even when the motivation is gone, even when the results are not visible yet, because that's the work that builds the person capable of winning. Every excuse you let go of gives you back a piece of your life. Every distraction you cut off gives you back your focus. Every small action you repeat gives you back your power. Most people won't understand your discipline, your silence, your grind, and that's exactly why you'll outrun them. Success doesn't come from being seen, it comes from being committed. So choose today to operate differently. Choose to stop negotiating with your comfort. Choose to stop waiting for permission. Choose to show the world what happens when someone goes all in on themselves. Your future is built by the version of you that refuses to quit, refuses to shrink, and refuses to settle for anything less than the life you know you're capable of creating. Go build that version. Go build that life. Go become the one who proves what focus can do.